It's strange how quiet a room can get when someone drops a bombshell. Not like the awkward silences you get during forced small talk, or the dull hush that follows bad news. I mean that sharp, electric stillness that wraps around your spine and makes your skin hum. That was the kind of silence we all sat in when the lawyer uttered those words. The house is legally and fully owned by his daughter, Anna Hale. It took a second to process. My mother blinked. Ivy's wineglass hovered midair, and Daniel looked like someone had just slapped him with a legal brief. And me? I just stared at the brass plate on Mr. Levin's desk, heart pounding in my ears but face calm. I didn't smile. I didn't smirk. I didn't need to. The silence said it all. Dot, let me back up a bit. I was always the odd one out. Not in the cute, quirky way people romanticize in coming-of-age movies, but in the real, isolating kind of way. The kind where every achievement you scrape together is still not enough, where you're always the punchline, the cautionary tale. Don't be like Anna, my mother used to say. She had potential, but look what she did with it. Veronica Hale, my mother, believed in order, status, and appearances, and I, apparently, threatened all three. I didn't follow the script. I wasn't a prodigy like Ivy, who got into med school early and married her college sweetheart, or a golden boy like Daniel, who always knew he'd be a lawyer and made partner before 35. I wanted to create. I wanted to sketch, paint, design. To her, that was code for unemployed and embarrassment. After college, which I dropped out of midway through a brutal sophomore year filled with anxiety attacks and a broken heart, I struggled to find footing. But eventually, I built a life. Freelance design gigs started picking up. I worked with wedding planners, local restaurants, even started branding work for small businesses. I was finally doing what I loved. But because it wasn't happening inside a hospital or a courtroom, it didn't count. Dot. Then my dad got sick. Dot, he was the only one who ever defended me. Quietly, sure. He wasn't confrontational. But he'd slip me books he thought I'd like, ask about my projects, encourage me to keep going. You've got a fire in you, Anna, he said once. Just because they don't see it doesn't mean it's not burning. When the cancer worsened, I came back home. I moved into the guest room, gave up my apartment, and took care of him while still juggling clients on my laptop. My mother was barely around. She claimed it was too painful, but somehow she still had time for her tennis club and book group. Ivy and Daniel visited occasionally, long enough for photo ops and family emails. Dot. After he passed, I stayed. Not because I wanted to, but because I felt like I had to. The house was falling apart, bills were behind, and Veronica wasn't capable of managing anything more than a social calendar. So I handled it. The roof repair, the leak under the sink, the tax paperwork, all of it. I did it without thanks, without acknowledgement, just insults. And still I stayed. Dot, until that dinner. Dot. She had a flair for public humiliation. With the whole family gathered, she went in for the kill, acting like she was cracking a joke. You're a guest in this house, not even a welcome one. The laughter that followed wasn't real, not even from Ivy, who was already shifting uncomfortably in her seat. But my mother was beaming, proud of her little performance. Dot. That was the moment I decided I was done being small. A week later, we were sitting in Mr. Levin's office, and everything changed. Dot. It turns out my father had made arrangements years before. A living trust, a notarized transfer. He never told anyone, not even me. He left the house to me, legally and fully, with no conditions. Dot. The weight of those words cracked the facade my mother had worn for decades. I saw it. The disbelief, the desperation flickering behind her eyes. She was scrambling to understand what had just happened. I stood up slowly, looked at her, at Ivy, at Daniel. If I'm such a disgrace, I said quietly, maybe it's time I started acting like I own the place. And I walked out. Dot. But that was just the beginning. Dot. Because power doesn't just shift quietly. It rattles the foundation. It pulls up secrets buried deep. And as I would soon learn, my mother had more to hide than I ever imagined. You'd think that moment in the lawyer's office would have been the climax, the mic drop, the revenge arc complete. But in reality, that was just the first crack in a very old, very controlled dam. And once it started to break, everything began to flood Dot. The days after the will reading were tense, to say the least. My mother barely looked at me. When she did, it was with a level of icy disdain that would have once shattered me. But not anymore. Something had shifted in me that day. Not just the legal power, but something deeper. A quiet sense of validation that I had never known Dot. At first, she tried to pretend nothing had changed. She still called the house hers, still barked commands at me like I was some lazy teenager. But now I didn't listen. If she asked me to cook, I reminded her the kitchen was open for use. If she complained about the thermostat, I suggested she take it up with the homeowner. Me, Dot. She hated it, Dot. She paced like a caged lion, dropping passive-aggressive comments under her breath. But when I didn't respond, her tactics shifted. She tried guilt next. One night she came into the kitchen while I was making tea and stood silently for a minute before saying, "Your father would be ashamed of the way you're treating your family." I didn't even flinch. I just stirred my cup and said, "My father left me this house. Maybe he saw something you didn't." She didn't reply, just turned and left, her shoulders stiff. Dot. What I didn't expect, though, was the fallout with Ivy and Daniel. I thought maybe, just maybe, they'd be a little more neutral. But I was wrong. Ivy stopped texting altogether. Daniel sent one curt message about being blindsided and how things could have been handled more delicately. As if I had orchestrated any of this, as if I'd known Dot. But the truth was, they weren't angry that the house went to me. They were angry because it didn't go to them. My mother had always said the house would be Ivy's one day, a sort of reward for being the perfect daughter. And Daniel had always assumed he'd inherit the lake property. But it turned out that was sold off years ago to pay medical bills. The house was the last real asset. And I got it. One afternoon, I overheard my mother on the phone in the sunroom. Her voice was low, but I caught phrases. Completely blindsided. Never respected tradition. We should contest it. I didn't need to hear more. She was talking to someone, probably Daniel, about fighting it. They couldn't, of course. The Living Trust had been airtight. Mr. Levins had made that clear, but that didn't stop them from trying to claw back some control, emotionally if not legally. I decided then I needed to make some decisions. If this was my house, it needed to feel like mine. The memories in the walls, the slamming doors, the shouted arguments, the belittling comments. I couldn't live inside that. I needed to reclaim the space. So I started small. I repainted the living room, took down all the dusty old portraits of Ivy's graduation and Daniel's wedding. I didn't throw them out. I just stored them in the attic. In their place, I hung a few of my own prints, abstract pieces I'd designed during one of my lowest periods. They were messy and imperfect and full of color, unlike anything my mother would have allowed. She didn't say anything the first day, or the second. But on the third morning, she walked into the living room, stared at the wall for a full minute, then muttered, "Looks like a child splattered paint," and called it art. I didn't respond. I just sipped my coffee and smiled. But the real shift came a week later, when a letter arrived. It was addressed to me, handwritten, no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper, and it wasn't a letter. It was a photocopy of a deed, a property transfer, a small cottage on Folly Beach signed over from one Veronica Hale to a private trust, dated just 3 months before my father's diagnosis. I stared at it, my heart thudding. My mother had sold a property, one I never even knew we owned, and moved it into a private trust. Quietly. Before my father passed, before any of the estate was finalized. I knew what it meant. She was hiding assets. Assets that should have been part of the will. Maybe that's why Dad had done what he did. Maybe he knew. Suddenly, the guilt, the manipulation, the bitterness. It all made sense. She wasn't just grieving or angry. She was scared. Scared I had more power than she thought. Scared I might uncover more than just her disdain. And now I had proof. But the question was, what was I going to do with it? I kept the photocopy folded in the back of my planner for 2 days before doing anything with it. Not because I didn't want to act, but because I needed time to breathe. Time to sit with the knowledge that my mother, the same woman who had always condemned me for being irresponsible, selfish, ungrateful, had secretly funneled property out of my father's estate before his will could take effect. S. She had beaten me down with lectures on honor and family pride. And all the while, she had been playing her own game behind closed doors. I didn't confront her right away. I knew better. This wasn't a fight to be won with shouting or accusations. She was too practiced for that. Too slippery. If I was going to challenge her, it had to be strategic. I needed to understand what that trust was, who managed it, and whether it could be touched. I took the document to Mr. Levensdott. He squinted at the copy, ran a hand down his face, and exhaled slowly. "This wasn't disclosed during probate," he said, "which is, frankly, suspicious. You're sure this was sent to you anonymously?" I nodded. "No return address. Just this." He leaned back, tapping a pen against his desk. "If your mother moved assets preemptively, and especially if your father had any legal claim to that property, this could be contested. But we'd need more. Access to the trust, paper trails, and it won't be easy. These kinds of things are usually buried deep." It wasn't the answer I wanted, but it was something. And more importantly, it confirmed what I already suspected. My mother had secrets. The house wasn't the only thing she'd tried to control. It was just the only thing she failed to dot back at home. She sensed a shift. She could feel it in the air, the way I moved through the house, the quiet confidence I wore like armor. She didn't know what had changed, but she knew something had. That night, she knocked on my bedroom door. Not barged in, knocked. That alone was new. "I'm making tea," she said. "Would you like some?" The olive branch caught me off guard. I followed her into the kitchen, watching as she moved around the cabinets with an unfamiliar stillness. For a moment, I saw something almost human in her. Tiredness, maybe, or fear. But it passed quickly. She sat across from me, both hands wrapped around her mug, like she was in a therapy session. "I know you think I've been hard on you," she began, "but I've always done what I thought was best for this family." I didn't say anything. She continued. "Your father, he didn't understand responsibility. He made decisions without thinking of the consequences. That house. He shouldn't have given it to you without discussing it with the rest of us." I looked her in the eye. "You mean without discussing it with you?" Her lips thinned. "He was impulsive and emotional. He had a soft spot for you." "Because he saw me," I said quietly. "He saw who I was, and he didn't treat me like a burden." She looked away then, and for the first time, I noticed her hands were trembling slightly. "Your siblings are furious," she said. "Ivy says she can't even speak to you right now. Daniel's considering his options legally." I shrugged. "Let them. I didn't ask for any of this. But I'm not giving it back, either." She stared at me for a long moment, as if trying to read the fine print on my soul. Then she said, "You think you've won something here, but you don't understand what it means to carry the weight of this house, of this family. Your father left it to you, yes, but he left it broken. Good luck trying to hold it together." And just like that, the mask slipped again. The warmth vanished. The softness hardened. She left her tea untouched on the counter and walked out of the room. But I didn't feel shaken. If anything, her words felt like confirmation. She was scared. Not of me, exactly, but of what I might do with the truth. She had ruled this family like a monarch, and now she was dethroned, living under the same roof she once reigned over, reduced to veiled insults and empty threats. But it wasn't over. Because a few days later, while going through a storage cabinet in the study, one of those locked drawers my mother had always guarded, I found something I wasn't supposed to see. An envelope. Thick, unlabeled. Inside, a mess of papers, handwritten notes, correspondence with an attorney I didn't recognize, and receipts. Receipts for payments to a nursing home, but not for anyone in our family. No. These were for a woman named Elise Varnell. I didn't recognize the name. At first. But then I remembered. Years ago, my father had mentioned an old friend he used to visit in secret. A woman from his childhood. He never said much, only that she had no one, and that he checked in on her from time to time. My mother always bristled when he brought her up. Now, here was a paper trail. Tens of thousands in payments, all from my mother's personal accounts. And one note, scrawled in my father's handwriting. If anything happens to me, make sure Elise is taken care of. She's more family than the ones who share my name. I stared at the paper, my stomach flipping. Who was Elise Varnell? And why had my father spent so much time and money taking care of her? I didn't know it then. But finding her would change everything. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at my desk, documents spread across the surface like a crime board, piecing together the shape of a woman I'd never met. Elise Varnell. The name was scribbled over and over on receipts from nursing care facilities, pharmacy bills, even a small transfer marked monthly stipend. Most of them dated back more than a decade. I couldn't stop thinking about that line in my father's handwriting. She's more family than the ones who share my name. At first, the implication sat heavy on my chest. Was Elise a mistress? A secret love? Had my father been living a double life all those years, while my mother stood at his side, cold and loyal and inflexible? The idea didn't repulse me, not because I condoned cheating, but because I knew what kind of woman my mother was. And if my father had been searching for comfort, I wouldn't have blamed him. Still, I needed answers. The receipts listed a facility, Summit Hollow Assisted Living, about 45 minutes outside Charleston. I called them the next morning and kept the conversation vague, pretending to be a long-lost niece just trying to check in. When they confirmed that Elise Varnell had passed away 3 years ago, I felt a strange ache I couldn't quite explain. Grief for a stranger. Maybe. Or maybe it was the weight of another story my family had buried without a second thought. But she hadn't been forgotten completely. Among the documents was a single photo, folded and creased at the corners. A younger Elise, maybe in her 40s, standing next to my father at what looked like a community picnic. They were both smiling, but the way his arm was placed gently around her waist said more than 1,000 words. I saw tenderness in that photo, real affection, not obligation. She meant something to him. And judging by the stack of receipts, he'd made sure she was cared for until the very end. But here's where it gets strange. Tucked behind the photo was a letter. Not from my father, but from Elise, dated just a few months before she died. Dearest Robert, you've done more for me than anyone ever has. I don't know how to repay you. If there's anything left when I'm gone, I want it to go to Anna. You always said she was the only one who truly listened, the only one with your eyes. Tell her the stories I never got to tell. I hope she'll find them somehow. Love always, Elise. My throat tightened. She knew about me. Not Ivy. Not Daniel. Me. I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just about money or some hidden connection. This was about legacy. My father had cared for her in life, and she, in turn, wanted to pass something on to me. I had no idea what, but suddenly the idea of finding out didn't feel optional anymore. I drove to Summit Hollow that afternoon. The facility was small, modest, the kind of place that smelled faintly of lavender and hospital-grade cleaner. When I asked the front desk if there was any record of Elise Varnell's effects, the receptionist looked surprised. Actually, she said, there was a box in storage. We didn't know who to give it to. No next of kin on record. She returned a few minutes later with a worn cardboard box, yellowed with age. I took it to my car and sat in the driver's seat, with my heart hammering Dot inside. A stack of journals. 5 in total, each one labeled in Elise's delicate, looping handwriting. The first dated back to 1998. The last ended in 2021, just months before she passed. I started reading right there in the parking lot, flipping to the earliest pages. She wrote about meeting my father again in their 40s, after years apart, how they'd grown up in the same town, shared the same childhood summers, and how he'd always been kind. The only boy who treated her like she mattered, even when everyone else called her strange. She had loved him quietly, even after he married my mother. But they hadn't been lovers. That's what struck me most. They had rekindled a deep, platonic bond, something more like soulmates than sweethearts. He brought her books. She painted small portraits of the two of them. He called them our secret history. She knew about his unhappiness, the pressure Veronica placed on him, the loneliness he felt when even his own children, Ivy and Daniel, treated him more like a bank account than a father. But not me. There were whole pages where she wrote about me, how he spoke of my creativity, my courage, the way I reminded him of the boy he used to be. She even included a small charcoal sketch of me at age 10, drawn from a photo my dad must have shown her. It was surreal. To be known, watched, loved from afar without ever realizing it. And then came the last journal. At the very end, she wrote something that made my breath catch. If the world were fair, Anna would have been mine. I would have raised her on stories and art and warmth. She would have known that being different is a gift, not a flaw. But the world isn't fair. So I hope this gift reaches her, and she uses it. Tucked into the final pages was a legal-looking envelope. Inside, a notarized letter stating that Elise Varnell had left the remainder of her modest estate, including an old property in Beaufort and her artwork collection, to me, Anna Hale. There it was, again. Another legacy, another inheritance my mother had tried to bury. I sat there stunned, shaking, staring at this strange and beautiful twist of fate. My mother had tried so hard to erase me from the story, to minimize, diminish, humiliate me. But here I was, now the legal owner of not just the house on Maple Crescent, but an entire other life that had been waiting for me just outside her reach. And that's when I realized something chilling. The reason she hated me so much wasn't just because I didn't become the doctor or the lawyer. It was because my father had loved me more than the others. And she knew it. I drove home with the box of journals on the passenger seat, like it was made of glass. Every bump in the road felt like a threat to the stories inside, stories that were never meant to be found by anyone outside of my father and Elise. And yet here I was, clutching a piece of a life I never lived, one that somehow belonged to me anyway. The house on Maple Crescent looked different when I returned. Not physically, it still stood, prim and stately under the moss-draped oaks, but in spirit. I'd always walked through that front door with shoulders hunched, waiting for a sigh or a judgment or another passive-aggressive reminder that I wasn't enough. But now, I felt like the house saw me differently, as if it recognized that I wasn't just passing through. I belonged here. My name was on the deed, and more importantly, my father had left behind more than square footage. He'd left me roots. He'd left me proof that I mattered. I set the journals in my room, placed Elise's letter on my dresser, and stared out the window into the thick southern twilight. I thought about not telling anyone, letting my mother believe her twisted little kingdom had only one crack, the house. But something inside me needed her to know, not for vengeance, but for the truth. I needed her to look at me and realize she hadn't broken me, that everything she tried to bury had only taken root deeper. So I waited for the next family gathering. I didn't have to wait long. Veronica decided to host another casual Sunday dinner, which was code for roast beef, wine, and emotional warfare. Ivy and Daniel arrived with their usual performative affection, hugging her like the Queen Mother while giving me tight, forced smiles. But this time, I didn't sit at the edge of the room. I carved the meat. I poured the wine. I sat at the head of the table, Dot. She didn't say anything, not yet. But I could feel her bristling, Dot. Dinner was its usual blend of polite hostility. Ivy talked about her latest hospital rotation. Daniel updated us on some high-profile client. And my mother, Ever, the curator of status, beamed like their achievements were her personal trophies, Dot. Finally, when plates were cleared and wine glasses refilled, she turned to me. "Well, Hannah," she said, voice sweet as poison, "now that you're the lady of the house, have you decided what you'll do with all this newfound responsibility? Planning to paint the shutters? Start a pottery barn out back?" Daniel chuckled. Ivy gave me that familiar look, pity barely hidden behind condescension, Dot. But I didn't flinch. "No," I said. "I've actually been spending some time going through Dad's old documents. It's amazing what people leave behind. Letters, journals, entire stories." Her glass paused mid-air. "Oh?" she said, her smile faltering just slightly. "I found a woman's name in there," I continued. "Elise Varnell. Ring any bells?" For a second, just a second, I saw it. Fear. A flicker in her eyes, gone so fast I might have missed it if I hadn't been waiting. "Dot." She set her glass down carefully. "Your father did charity work for all sorts of people. He was sentimental like that." "She wasn't charity," I said, my voice steady. "She was family. He made sure she was taken care of, and she made sure I was too. She left me her journals, her estate, a property in Beaufort." The silence that fell over the table was thick, electric. I looked from Ivy's confused frown to Daniel's furrowed brow, and finally to my mother's frozen expression. "She left you what?" Ivy asked, clearly thrown. "A house," I repeated, "and a collection of artwork. She was an artist. She knew Dad from way back. Before you were married, Mom." My mother's face turned pale. "She even wrote that if the world were fair, she would have raised me," I added, watching her jaw twitch. "That I reminded her of him, not you." The moment cracked something in the air. Not explosive, not yet, but splintering. My mother stood slowly, smoothed the front of her blouse like she was brushing off the past, and said in a tone laced with steel, "That woman was nothing. A confused, broken girl who latched onto men she couldn't have. Your father felt sorry for her. That's all." "No," I said quietly. "He loved her. Maybe not the way you want to believe, but he loved her. And he trusted me with her memory. Not you, not Ivy, not Daniel. Me." My siblings shifted uncomfortably. "I think it's time you stopped trying to rewrite the story," I said, meeting her eyes. "You spent your whole life trying to make me feel small, but now everything you tried to hide is in my hands." There was no screaming, no slamming of doors, just a long, sharp silence as the truth settled into every crack of the room, Dot. She didn't argue, Dot. She didn't apologize, Dot. She just walked out of the dining room like she was going to scream into a pillow somewhere no one could hear. I should have felt satisfied, Dot, but all I felt was empty, Dot. Because the truth, no matter how powerful, doesn't heal you overnight. Dot. It doesn't patch up the lost birthdays, or the humiliations, or the years of silence between me and my siblings. Dot, what it does, though, is clear the path, Dot. And that night, for the first time in my life, I saw where it was leading. I was finally free, Dot, but freedom has a price, Dot, and mine was about to show up at my doorstep. Dot, the knock came 2 weeks later. Not loud, not urgent. Just steady. Like someone who already knew they'd be invited in. I was in the studio space I'd carved out for myself in the sunroom, a makeshift corner with scattered sketchbooks, charcoal dust on the windowsill, and a mug of cold coffee forgotten beside a half-finished canvas. I'd started painting again, not for a client, not for a deadline, just to remember what it felt like to create without needing to prove anything. Dot. The knock cut through my thoughts like a dull blade. I wiped my hands and walked to the door, not expecting anything, except maybe a package, or another awkward neighbor asking about my new ownership. But it wasn't a delivery. It was a man. Late 30s, maybe early 40s, tall, familiar eyes. "Anna Hale?" he asked, voice calm but cautious. I nodded slowly. "Yes?" He smiled faintly. "My name's Simon. Simon Varnell. Elise was my aunt." The name hit me like a jolt. Dot. Varnell Dot, he looked like her. Not perfectly. More weathered, broader shoulders, the kind of face that had seen disappointment and learned not to flinch at it. But there was something in the eyes, that deep, searching softness, the same one in the old photographs Elise had hidden between her journal pages. I let him in without thinking. Dot. He stepped inside and looked around, as if he expected the walls to speak. I offered him coffee, but he waved it off. "I came because I found your name in my aunt's will," he said, settling into the armchair across from me. "But I didn't realize who you were, not until I saw the address." I nodded, still trying to catch up with my own thoughts. "She never mentioned you in the journals." He gave a small, bitter laugh. "No, I guess I was part of the life she left behind when she moved to Beaufort. I was young. My parents didn't want anything to do with her after she chose your father." I looked down. "I'm sorry. Don't be. I needed to see you. To understand why she left everything to a stranger. But you're not a stranger, are you?" He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "She used to talk about a child she never got to know. A little girl with her eyes and his hands. She never said your name, but she talked about you like a ghost she missed every day." I swallowed hard. "She left you everything because you were the closest thing to family she had left," he said. And maybe she was right. For a long moment, we just sat there, breathing in the dust and the history hanging between us. Dot. Then Simon reached into his coat and pulled out a small, worn envelope. "She wrote this for you. Told me to give it to you myself, if I ever had the courage." I took it with trembling fingers. The envelope was thin, the paper yellowed, but her handwriting was unmistakable. I didn't open it right away. I couldn't. Not with him watching. Dot. Instead, I looked up at him. "Why now?" "Because I needed to know if the past was worth digging up," he said. "Turns out it is. When he left, he didn't ask for anything. Not money, not property, not even answers. Just a hug. Hesitant at first, then tight, like something breaking loose inside both of us. We didn't say goodbye. We said soon. Dot. That night, when the house was quiet and the ghosts were still, I opened the letter. Dot. It was short. Dot. Just a few lines in Elise's graceful cursive. Anna, comma. If you're reading this, then the truth has finally found you. I spent most of my life wondering if loving your father was a mistake, if holding on to your memory was weakness. But I see now it was the strongest thing I ever did. Dot. You were never meant to be forgotten. You are not a disgrace. You are not a failure. You are everything he loved most in this world. And I loved you too. Even from a distance. Dot. Use what I've left you. Create. Dream. Live louder than the silence they tried to bury you in. Dot. This world wasn't fair to you, so make it yours." "Elise," I cried. Dot. Not the messy, dramatic kind, but the quiet, shaking kind that slips out in gasps. Because for the first time in my life I felt seen. Not tolerated, not dismissed. Seen. Dot. In that letter. She didn't give me permission. She gave me freedom. Dot. And freedom, I was learning, isn't just about owning a house or winning an argument. It's about choosing what kind of life you want to live once the war ends. Dot. The next day I packed a bag. I needed to see the Beaufort house. I needed to stand in the rooms Elise once painted in, to touch the walls that had held the pieces of my father's heart. I didn't tell my mother I was leaving, not that she'd asked. Since the dinner, we'd barely spoken. She walked around like a ghost, her pride bleeding out one silent morning at a time. Dot. Let her wonder. Dot. Let her feel the weight of everything she lost. Dot. Because I wasn't staying small for her anymore. I drove toward Beaufort under a sky thick with salt and sun. The road curved along marshes and rivers, sleepy towns blinking in and out of view. And as the miles passed, I felt lighter, like every mile was a step closer to a self I'd forgotten I could be. Dot. The house stood at the end of a gravel path, hidden behind oaks and wild roses. Small, weathered, perfect. I unlocked the door with the key Elise's lawyer had mailed me and stepped inside. It smelled like sunlight and old books. Paint lingered faintly in the air. On the walls hung a dozen unfinished canvases, like she'd been waiting for someone to complete them. I dropped my bag and stood in the center of the room, spinning slowly. This wasn't just a house. It was a second chance. And I wasn't going to waste it. But as I began to explore the attic, flipping open crates of photographs and portfolios, I found something that changed everything. A set of legal documents. Newer than I expected. Dated just 2 years ago. A new name on the paperwork. One I didn't recognize. A Kodash owner. Someone else had a claim to the house. And they were coming for it. They say time reveals all truths. But sometimes, it takes courage to make truth scream so loud that no one can ignore it. The name on the co-ownership papers was a twist I hadn't seen coming. Veronica Hale. My mother, Dodie. 2 years before Elise died, she had somehow manipulated her way into being added as a silent co-owner of the Beaufort property. Through pressure, legal loopholes, or some debt Elise had agreed to in desperation. The documents were real, stamped, filed, legally binding. It was her final play. One last tether to pull me back down into her shadow. But this time I didn't flinch. Instead, I'd hired a lawyer. Not a cheap one, not a passive one, but a woman named Camilla Voss. Razor sharp, terrifyingly efficient. And best of all, she believed me. Believed what Elise meant, what the will meant, what my father's final wish truly was. With her help, we filed for a full ownership claim. Citing fraud, undue influence, and hidden conflicts of interest. It turned into a public legal battle. My mother had to show up in court, dressed in her polished heels and her 2 perfect pearls, as the mask of family pride began to crack. Ivy and Daniel came too, but not to support her. They came out of curiosity, maybe even guilt. And when the evidence spilled out, the bank transfers, the pressured signatures, the email Elise had written weeks before her death expressing fear of being manipulated, the courtroom turned cold. My mother stood silent, her hands clenched like claws, as the judge read the ruling. Full ownership of the Beaufort property is hereby granted to Miss Anna Hale. All prior claims based on coerced documentation are nullified. She didn't look at me. Not then. Not when the reporters started sniffing around. Not even when Ivy asked, in a whisper I caught through the hallway echo, "Why would you do this to her, Mom?" Because that was the moment the roles reversed. She wasn't the matriarch anymore. She was just a woman who got caught. She lost everything she had tried to control. Not just the house, but her grip on the family. Her reputation in the community shattered. People started seeing through the performative charm. The donations that were more about image than generosity. The way she spoke to people like they were chess pieces. One by one. The invitations stopped coming. Even Daniel, who once echoed her every condescending smirk, moved out of state and started therapy. He sent me an email. Not an apology, but close. "You were right. About all of it." I didn't reply. Some ghosts don't deserve answers. A's for me. I moved into the Beaufort house permanently, sold a few of Elise's paintings, and used the money to renovate the studio. Clients started finding me. Real ones. Passionate ones. Not corporate vultures, but people who wanted art that felt like something. I taught a few classes at the local community center, bought a second-hand bike, made friends with a bookstore owner who read poetry aloud every Thursday. And slowly, I built a life. A real one. I saw Simon again, too. Not romantically, not yet at least, but we walked the marsh trails, swapped memories, shared silence. Sometimes silence says more than words ever could. As for my mother, last I heard, she moved in with a distant cousin in Virginia. The house on Maple Crescent was sold, and not by her, because, in the final twist of poetic justice, I owned that one too. She had no claim left. I let her take her things, her clothes, her paintings, her pride. That she left behind. I never spoke to her again. I didn't need to. She had built her identity on being the queen of a crumbling empire, and now she was just another bitter woman shouting at the wind. One evening, I stood on the porch of the Beaufort house, watching the sunset spill gold over the marshes. A letter arrived in the mailbox, hand-delivered, no return address. Inside was a photo. Me, at age 5, sitting in Elise's lap. My father beside us, smiling in a way I'd never seen in any other photo. Behind the image, in Elise's looping cursive, were 4 words. You were always mine. I smiled, tears slipping free, not from pain but from something deeper. Closure. Wholeness. I had lost so much, but I'd reclaimed more. I hadn't just won a legal battle. I'd rewritten my place in the family story. I was no longer the disgrace. I was the legacy. And as I locked the front door that night, I thought of my mother, alone, bitter, clinging to a title no one believed in anymore. You said I'd never amount to anything, I whispered. Turns out I'm the one with the keys now.